Central Asian Oriental sculpture and masterpieces of Western European art, shimmering Oriental ornaments, and antique marble compositions. Works of prominent avant-garde artists and mysterious characters of Japanese kuyo engraving. All this is the jewel of the collection of the State Museum of Uzbekistan. It was created in Tashkent exactly 100 years ago in 1918. During its lifetime, museum has lived through a lot of amazing stories that are connected both of the fate of the people and the fate of the amazing collections that are stored here. But first things first. The collection of the museum evolved from the collection of Great Duke Nikolai Romanov, grandson of the Russian Emperor Nikolai I. The military official Nikolai Romanov, who was awarded the highest award for military merits in the year 80, was unexpectedly sent to exile to Turkestan. Along with him, his art collection was transported, which was an ornament of his palace, built in the center of Tashkent in 1883. These marble masterpieces of the museum were the first sculptures that were then installed in Tashkent in an oak park adjacent to the palace. It was a private collection, a private museum. It contained 500 exhibits. Mixture of Russian and Western European, paintings, graphics, as well as works of sculpture, furniture, porcelain. This collection was one of a kind. The crown jewel of the collection of the Duke was also a spectacular large canvas, The Bather, in the style of Andrei Beloli's Nude, and painting full of expression by Konstantin Makovsky, the preacher. And the antique sculpture Venus with a Dolphin, created by an unknown artist in the 3rd century BC and brought by Romanov after traveling to Europe. Well, perhaps the most famous painting from the collection of Romanov, which is still shrouded in mystery, guesses, and assumptions, is the painting Lamentation of Christ. Catalogue of the museum, published in 1929, described the painting painted by the great Italian Renaissance painter Paolo Veronese. In the diaries of the Duke himself, there are records of his trip to Venice and the history of Veronese's masterpiece acquisition. But in subsequent years, the museum documents were listed as the work of an unidentified Venetian artist of the 16th century. According to the director of the museum, Vassilia Faizieva, researchers will have to unwind this tangle for a long time until all the data about this picture becomes reliable. A few years ago, there was a huge sensation about the work of Veronese, which is stored in the collections of the State Museum of Art. Personally, in my opinion, I believe that all the same, now the technology in the museum business is so developed that of course we have to work on this issue. And of course we need experts, say world-class assessment, who would truly admit this fact, and we could easily bring this fact to the court of the world community. A passionate collector and philanthropist, Duke Nikolai Konstantinovich Romanov, in 1918 wrote a will, certified by a notary, where he bequeathed his entire collection to the University of Turkestan. I, the undersigned Grand Duke Nikolai Konstantinovich Romanov, in my sound mind and solid memory, make the following order in case of death. The palace I own in Tashkent and a museum and all property in it I'm leaving for life storage and full ownership of the University of Turkestan. It was a reconciled and historic decision, as the prince's collection contained works that aroused delight and reverence for all those who are familiar with the history of world art, from works of Italian Renaissance masters to classics of Russian передвижничества. So the collection of Nikolai Romanov, back in the 20s of the last century, gained the status of an art museum. For me, as an artist, the Art Museum of Uzbekistan is a palace where our nation's treasures kept. Here, it's like a portal. Our museum is like this. From one hall, you enter another world. From Uzbekistan, you come to Europe, from Europe to Russia, from Russia to India, and you understand this is a portal from one world to another, and you get to know everything. It seems to me, in general, for humanity, this is a great find of heritage, an invaluable contribution to this bank, so to speak. This bank is a collection of spiritual values. Since the 20s of the last century, museum collections have been constantly replenished with new works. These were receipts from famous large museums and state museum funds of Moscow and St. Petersburg. The collection of the State Museum of Art received a variety of works, pictorial, graphic, sculptural from various Russian museums. There were works of Russian art, there were works of Western European art, but along with this, national art was certainly of greatest interest. Thus, the Tashkent Museum became the owner of the priceless canvases of the great Russian and Western European artists such as Van Dyck and George Doe, Vladimir Borovikovsky and Vasily Tropinin, Ilya Repin and Valentin Serov. Along with the portraits, the museum exhibits historical canvases of Nikolai Gay and Grigory Mesaedov, landscapes of Ayvazovsky and Kuinji. The State Museum of Art of Uzbekistan has a first-class collection of Russian avant-garde back in the early 20s, works by the founders of abstract art, Vasily Kandinsky and Kazimir Malevich, arrived here. Works by Alexei Yavlensky and Alexander Exter. The collections of the museums are so significant that it is almost impossible to enlist the names of all the artists in one program. The collections of the museum allow us to trace the evolution of art on the one hand, and on the other hand, when you look at the paintings of the artist, you penetrate into the inner world of each. You understand his place in the history of art, but at the same time, you understand that every artist is a huge reservoir that requires study, which is distinguished by its unique artistic worldview. Therefore, I believe that the collection of the State Museum of Art is definitely a storehouse of the most diverse art. The jewel of collection is also Pablo Picasso's collection of ceramics. The original work of the great master from the 20th century was donated to the museum in 1968 from the funds of the Pushkin State Museum of Art in Moscow. Earlier, this priceless ceramics belonged to the French artist Fernand Léger. After his death, his entire bequest collection was transferred to Russia. There are video chronicles with preserved moments of ceramic masterpieces birthed in Picasso's studio. Despite the rich diversity of the museum collection in Tashkent, its basis and originality is the art of Uzbekistan. The sculptures of the ancient and early medieval art of Uzbekistan are of particular importance. This is the famous ancient clay sculpture Halchiana, dated 1st century BC. All these unique sculptural compositions once decorated the palace of the Kushan ruler. The excavations of the ancient settlement Hachian in the south of the Republic began in the 50s of the last century. The discovery of this sculpture happened, as it often does, by chance. There was demolition of the site called Tepa, an ordinary hill in the Kalcha region, with bulldozers. And out of the blue, there was discovered fragments of sculpture. Fortunately, then it was possible to stop the demolition and discover other parts of the masterpiece. Special famous Uzbek art history expedition was created just for the further excavations on the site, archaeological study and study of precisely ancient art of the region. The leader of the expedition was a world-renowned scientist, academician Galina Pugachenkova. These are exact moments when these amazing artifacts have been extracted from the earth. Almost 70 years have passed. Thus, for the first time, Uzbek archaeologists managed to obtain visible images of the ancient Bactrian civilization. Thanks to the excavations, for example, in our region, for the first time, they managed to reveal traces of the high civilization, high culture, and now this remarkable art, which was formed as a result of synthesis, Greek or mystical traditions, and some local. Kolchan sculpture shows us how this harmonically merges in sync. Sculptures from the Buddhist temple of Kuva of the Fergana Valley testify to a conglomerate of cultures that have been concentrated on the land of Uzbekistan since ancient times. They date back to the 7th century. This is Buddha and the fearsome deity Mara, expressive images of militant defenders of the Buddhist faith. This is a Buddhist temple from Kuva. It dates back to the 7th century, and it is distinguished by the unique style of art that is represented there. This temple in Kuva was built by the builders of one particular line of Buddhism. This is a school of Vajrayana. The so-called in it was a strong influence of Hinduism, and therefore in the images we see, such as here, say the skull on the heads of some of the statues, the images are demonic. This is the influence of Hinduism, the influence of Hindu iconography on Buddhism. Another masterpiece of the early medieval art of Uzbekistan are the wall paintings of Varaksha, the country palace of the Bukhar Hudat, the rulers of Bukhara. The Bukhara oasis is part of Sogdiana. Silk trade along the Silk Road was extremely developed. Sogdians took advantage of this in the early Middle Ages, and they were intermediaries in the trade between East and West. This led to a good, high level of income. Caravan trade is something that Central Asia has always been famous for, and people have the opportunity to abundantly decorate their homes. The originals of the monumental composition with scenes of hunting from the Red Hall of the Varashin's palace are stored not only in the Tashkent Museum. Most of this unique mural is exhibited in their Hermitage halls. From the second half of the 30s of the last century, the museum begins to collect works of national decorative and applied art. Uzbekistan possessed a unique historical and cultural heritage, and an important part of it was traditional arts and crafts, and certainly in the 30s there was a great interest in traditional culture, which was still preserved. Great master remained, they continued work, and these ethnographic expeditions organized by the State Museum of Art, it certainly contributed to the fact that the collection was replenished with various works of craft. It can be stated that museum became the second period. Until the 60s, huge expeditionary work was carried out. It should be noted that managers who worked in this museum and scientists who contributed to this museum are an indispensable part of the development of art and culture of Uzbekistan. Numerous expeditions to various regions of Uzbekistan allowed to collect unique collections of folk art. The most valuable items that the Uzbek people have had been carefully collected. I did not witness it anywhere in the world, and I was in countries of the East, in the countries of the West, where there are a lot of collections of Eastern traditions. But those that are in our areas, say embroidery, atlas, beykasabs, adras, and so on, carpets, skull caps, this is unique and it's found nowhere else. Therefore, I still think that we have the most valuable samples of our applied art items. Skillful and talented wood carving adorns the doors created by masters of the Tashkent, Khiva, and Kokand schools. Patterns of plant and geometric patterns, copper-chased kumgans, aftaba, and dashui make these widely used items in everyday life genuine works of art. The earliest of them date back to the 18th century. Honed by centuries-old traditions, they are flawless in their forms. The traditional suzane presented in the exhibition dates back to the 19th century. Uzbek embroidery is strictly regulated by customs and rights of the people. They embodied the poetic views of skilled craftswomen about the beauty of the world around them. The symbolism of patterns was transmitted through the female line from generation to generation, with a variety of embroidery reflected the desire of people to a bright and colorful design of their life. The collections of the museum include more than 2,000 patterns of hand embroidery. Another unique collection of the museum is the collection of gold embroidery. These are gorgeous men's and women's bathrobes. Zardozi Zamendozi continues sewing, and with the pattern of a drawing by Zardozi Guldozi. Since the 19th century, the art of gold embroidery was concentrated exclusively in Bukhara. During the reign of Muzaffar Khan, it was the years of 1860 to 1885, he reigned for 25 years. In the arch at the emir's residence, court gold embroidery workshops were organized, where only men embroidered velvet and silk with gold threads, which were called zardust. Fabrics for gold dressing gowns were imported from Persia and Turkey, India and Syria, and even from France. The outstanding phenomena of folk art were silk and semi-silk national fabrics. There were legends about the origin of the drawing. A blurry, literally melting pattern was compared with clouds floating in the sky and with images of traditional jewelry. Uzbek fabrics were a huge success in the Middle East and Europe. The collection of jewelry of the museum is a magnificent work of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Very lush, rich, inlaid with corals, chest decorations of the shokil earrings, and tumar of the Khwarezm school. Exquisite enameled nozigardons and zebigards with precious and semi-precious stones created in Bukhara and Tashkent. Their artistic expression and value is indisputable, but in their creation there was a social gradation. Gold and gilded were intended only for the nobility. The middle layers wore silver jewelry, often inlaid with colored glass. Products made of copper and bronze were the opulences of the poor. Uzbek jewelers alike owned both casting and forging, techniques of open work filigree and engraving. One of the largest collections of the museum is a collection of Uzbek painting. It fully reflects the complex and unique way of shaping the development of a national school, which is practically no more than a century old. Uzbek paintings in the museum collection is represented by a variety of trends and directions, from avant-garde and impressionistic works of the early 20th century to realistic mid-century, and of course, the works of artists of the new generation. Richard Zomer repeatedly worked at the end of the 19th century on request of the Russian Imperial Archaeological Commission in Turkestan, the master of architectural landscapes. His painting, The Bazaar in Samarkand, was created in 1897. The painting, with documentary and vivid authenticity, conveys the atmosphere of a hot day, the bustle of the bazaar, which is stretched stalls in the square in front of the legendary Bibi Hanum Mosque. It was one of the first paintings with Uzbek themes, which has been stored in the museum since 1927. National School Fine Arts formation logically happens in the 1920s and 30s. Artists who came from Russia to Uzbekistan purchased a second home and made a great contribution here, and they certainly contributed to the formation of this national school. Here is the good Uzbek avant-garde. You can see here works of Nikolaev, Karahan, early Tansekbayev, Kashin, and so on and so forth. And what a piece of art in graphics we have. What amazing drawings, which in general, in my opinion, have never been shown. The golden fund of Uzbek national art includes works by Alexander Volkov, an artist whose style and work are instantly recognizable. A prominent representative of the so-called Turkestan avant-garde and native of Fergana, he created here not only hundreds of paintings, but also established his own school. An era of amazing work, which he's saying is seen through his works. He did believe in the ideals of his era and personified all of his heroes precisely in movement and music. By watching his work, you can feel how the drums sound, the sound of karnai and surnai. Can you feel it? Colors are rhythm. These were extraordinary artists. It was a generation of unique personalities. One of them was Alexander Nikolaev, Ustomomin. He was Russian by nationality, but he accepted Islam in Uzbekistan. Student of the Patriarch of Kazimir Malevich's formalism, he diligently searched for his own style while closely studying the many-sided art of Uzbekistan. And it was not just a reverence for Eastern values, it was a way of realizing his truth. And in this love for the Muslim East, the whole genius of Ustomomin. Here in the museum are stored about 30 of his paintings, which are equated to the world classics. Dozens of monumental, famous impressionistic paintings by the greatest artist of the 20th century, Pavel Benkov, adorn the museum exposition. In 1928, when he was already a mature artist, he first came to Uzbekistan, first to Bukhara and Khiva, and then to Samarkand. He connected to the city and stayed there for good. He depicted majestic monuments and small, cozy courtyards. Very poetic and anxiously, the artist creates an image of Oriental women. The portrait of a Tatar girl was created by the artist even before his arrival in Uzbekistan, but he did not part with it all of his life. What prompted him to do this? He did not leave an answer to this question. One of the latest masterpieces of the artist, The Girl with Dutar. It seemed to be a painter enjoying the wealth of exquisite colors and the game of sun glare. It is hard to imagine that this life-affirming picture was painted by a seriously ill artist, literally 2 years before his death. An integral part of the life of Pavel Benkov was the pedagogical activity, to which he gave almost 40 years. Our respondents, the present academicians of the Academy of Arts of Uzbekistan, Javlon Umarbekov and Bahadir Jalalov, also went through the Benkov School in the widest sense of the word. Entire galaxy of magnificent artists who discovered the East were able to synthesize their sense of the East with the creative phenomena of their time, and as a result of this museum received the gift of magnificent works. Chingiz Akhmarov, an outstanding master of monumental culture, belonged to the first generation of artists of Uzbekistan. His canvases in the Museum of Art of Uzbekistan are a series of perfectly harmonious images of the Eastern period. He captured playing and dancing beauties as if poems of Khosrav Dehlavi and Hafiz, who came to us from the pages of the tales of 1001 Nights. Literally every canvas of the artist seemed to breathe the classics of Eastern culture. He lived a great paradoxical life, created hundreds of beautiful beauties, but his heart belonged to only one woman, Shamsiroy Hasanova. A talented painter, she was the first Uzbek artist and director of this museum. Her work was tragically interrupted by an incurable disease. She died young at 39 years old. In her gallery of portraits of great Uzbek poets Uvaisi and Zebin Sobegem, this is the lyrical confession of a great artist. A new stage of art of Uzbekistan is associated with the name of Rahim Ahmedov. An outstanding portrait painter, he created works that immediately became classics of Uzbek painting. The Morning of Motherhood, in this large composition, is literally physically perceptible both to the coolness of the early morning and the transparency of the air of the mountain village and peace and quiet. This is definitely one of the iconic works of the early 60s of the last century. It is impossible to pass over in silence the creative work of Ural Tansikbayev, in his youth a bright representative of the Turkestan avant-garde, and in more mature years he creates pacified epic landscapes. There is a further emancipation of art, when the creative tradition is understood alternatively, when it is already synthesized in a new aspect. Let's say the East and the West are turning to the avant-garde art of the 20s, and this also enriches the visual arts. Creativity of Javlon Umarbekov, one of the individual pages of the history of painting in Uzbekistan. From his first works, he declares himself as an outstanding master, intrigued with the history of civilization. The fame of an outstanding artist brought him hundreds of works that were exhibited in Russia and in Europe, in the United States of America, and in the countries of the Middle East. His large canvas, The Homo sapiens, is a philosophical reflection on the paths of reason and the intersection of cultures of the East and the West. I learned a lot through this museum. I often come here to my favorite artists. Many years later, I myself became a member of this team, and my paintings were also displayed as exhibits of the fine arts of Uzbekistan. Javlon Umarbekov is one of the outstanding masters of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, because he has best trends that artists of the 20s have absorbed to glorify the spirit of the times. He's a master, virtuoso painter, virtuoso artist. Bahadur Jalalov also became a living classic of Uzbek painting. The works of the artists are represented in the collections of the museum, created in the style of metaphors and parables. The State Museum of Art of the Republic of Uzbekistan is one of the leading and major museums in the region of Central Asia, and I think the value of this museum collection lies not only in the number of exhibits, but above all in the significance of those works that are contained in this collection. Today, the museum has more than 100,000 exhibits and 4 sections operating: the Department of National Applied Art of Uzbekistan, the Paint Department of Uzbekistan, the Department of Russian and Western European Art, and the Department of Foreign East. We are proud of these exhibits, of our masterpieces. many world museums that not only collect and store, but also deeply study works of art are called academic. Getting acquainted with the various collections of arts of the Museum of Uzbekistan in Tashkent, we can fully apply this epithet. After all, here the exhibition presents only 3% of the total number of collections that are stored in the funds of the museum, and they are still waiting for their researchers. This has been the cultural legacy of Uzbekistan in the world collections. Shahnoza Ganieva, thank you for your attention.